CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello, welcome to The World Today, live from CGTN in London. I'm Paul Barber with the top stories this hour. Another possible lockdown over Christmas, so warns a top UK advisor, unless tougher measures are brought back in to stem coronavirus. Gang violence escalates in Mexico as 2 foreign tourists are killed in a beach resort. And we take a look at how Austria's electric vehicles have the potential to help power the country's electricity grid. The British government is facing pressure to bring back restrictions to curb a rise in COVID infections. Daily cases have exceeded 50,000 this week, and more than 220 people died on Tuesday, the highest level since March. It comes as experts investigate a new variant of the virus known as Delta Plus, which may spread more easily. Our correspondent Naweed Jabarkil joins us from the newsroom now. So what's behind this new COVID surge, Naweed?
Yeah, the surge continuing on Saturday. Paul, the latest figures to come out from the UK, 45,000, just shy of 45,000 new cases recorded in the last 24 hours and another 135 deaths. There are a number of reasons for the surge. One of them is the waning vaccination, the effect of waning vaccinations. The UK raced ahead much of other parts of Europe and indeed the world in rolling out the vaccine. It was the first country in the world to roll out a working vaccine in December, but that means that the impact of that has fallen off slightly in recent months, which is why you're seeing cases surge. That's what the government says, but also looking at rolling this out to other parts of the population that haven't been vaccinated yet. School children and young people, a particular area of focus for the government. But that chorus of voices, health experts, doctors warning that the pressure this is leading to on the health service is becoming difficult, very difficult to manage with, and it means for Boris Johnson, he has yet another dilemma when it comes to responding to COVID-19. With winter approaching, COVID-19 cases in the UK are rising sharply. Around 50,000 positive tests are being reported each day, a rise of almost a fifth on the previous week. Once again, there are familiar questions about whether the country needs to go back into lockdown.
I've got to tell you at the moment that we see absolutely nothing to indicate that that's on the cards.
If a lockdown is to be avoided, vaccines could play a crucial role. The UK raced ahead of much of the world in offering jabs, but experts say that immunity is waning. Adding to concerns is a new variant of coronavirus being investigated here. Known as Delta Plus, officials say it may spread more easily than regular Delta and currently makes up around 6% of cases nationwide.
It's very important that people do follow the guidance on general behaviour, on being cautious, on wearing masks in confined places where you're meeting people you don't normally meet, wear a mask, wash hands, ventilation, all that kind of thing.
Despite that official advice telling people to wear masks in crowded places, many people here in London at least are choosing not to. There's no longer a legal requirement to follow much of the guidance, which may be contributing to rising case numbers. According to a YouGov survey last month, just 3 in 5 people said they were still wearing masks in public places. The World Health Organization has warned it's risky to rely on vaccines alone, but any return to restrictions is likely to lead to strong pushback from businesses, as well as many of the Prime Minister's own colleagues. It's a difficult balancing act that will mean tough choices while the virus rages on.
Naweed, you mentioned in your report there those who aren't keen on another lockdown. Tell us more.
Yeah, many businesses will be wary of restrictions being brought back in, particularly those that rely on customers getting into tight spaces. For example, pubs and restaurants. Analysis presented to the government earlier this year before it took that decision to remove all restrictions in July suggested that the hospitality and events industries could lose up to £5.5 billion if people had to wear masks when attending their venues. But aside from that, lawmakers as well pushing back to this. And we heard in that report the figures that only 3 in 5 people are wearing masks. So there may be some public opinion behind the need for lawmakers to resist this as well. But ultimately, cases are rising, hospitalisation and deaths are rising, and doctors say that on the front line things are becoming very grim again, and ultimately that may be the most important metric when it comes to in deciding what the government does next.
Yes, a worrying picture. Nuija Barkil, thank you very much. Well, in the United States, health officials say the COVID booster program is off to a strong start. They've approved a mix and match approach, which offers different booster jabs to people's first ones. The Food and Drug Administration says Pfizer's is 91% effective for children aged 5 to 11. And as Nick Harper reports, if it's authorised, vaccinations could start next month.
The White House says 70 million Americans are now eligible for booster shots, and they can choose which one they receive. The US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has approved boosters of Moderna and the Johnson & Johnson vaccines. And patients can choose what they get, even if it's different from what they were originally inoculated with. CDC Director Rochelle Walensky, though, said officials are not recommending one booster over another.
We will not articulate a preference. My understanding is that most people will have done largely well with the initial vaccine that they got and may express a preference very much for the original vaccine series they got, having done very well. There may be some people who might prefer another vaccine over the one that they received, and the current CDC recommendations now make that possible.
10 million Americans have already received booster shots, and the White House says another 50 million will become eligible in the coming months. People who originally received Pfizer or Moderna doses more than 6 months ago and are aged 65 or older or at high risk are eligible, while anyone who initially received the single-shot J&J dose 2 months or more ago is now eligible. And now children could also soon be in line to start receiving COVID-19 vaccinations. Trial data from Pfizer shows that its dose is highly effective in 5 to 11-year-olds. And next week, Food and Drug Administration advisors will decide whether to recommend vaccinations for children. However, there's growing concern about state restrictions. More than half of America's 50 states have now introduced laws making it harder for authorities to address the health crisis. At least 32 states have put in place measures such as banning mask or vaccine mandates. Health officials are worried it will prevent them from imposing a range of measures, including quarantines, if there's a surge in cases over the winter months. Nick Harper, CGTN, Washington.
Gender inequality in the workplace has long been an issue in Venezuela, where a prolonged economic crisis has seen many women struggle to find employment. Experts say the coronavirus pandemic has made the problem even worse. Mary Trini Mina reports from Caracas.
It's what you do when you're trying to find a job. Zuleika Montero spends much of her day checking her cell phone, hoping for good news. She lost her job at a convenience store more than a year ago, and she's devoted herself to looking for work.
Generally, when I stopped working in the past, I was out of work for about 15 days. Never before did I stop working for this long.
According to surveys carried out by the World Bank, women in Latin America were 44% more likely to lose their jobs than men at the onset of the coronavirus pandemic, and job losses continue to persist at a higher rate among women. 21% of Latin American women who were employed prior to the pandemic report they have lost their jobs. Before the pandemic, Scarlyn Duarte worked as an administrative assistant in a private clinic. She was one of several staff who lost their jobs. And now, a year and a half later, and with a new baby at home, Scarlyn is struggling to find employment.
I was suddenly just cut loose, and it's frustrating. I'm not finding another job, and also I'm angry because I was fired just like that.
Women are more often employed in the kinds of businesses that were badly hit by COVID-19 restrictions, such as restaurants, tourism, and domestic service. Jobs in those businesses are still very hard to come by.
The Venezuelan economy has shrunk by 74% during the last 6 years, and its GDP declined 30% last year. For people who are out looking for work, it's an uphill battle to find any position.
The last year has seen an increase in the number of people working as street vendors, especially an increase in the number of women selling drinks, toys, used household items to earn an income.
If it's not possible for them to return to a formal job because of their age or current conditions, they will look for other ways to provide for their families. Despite their abilities and their experience, many women are forced to migrate to the informal sector.
Like many Venezuelan women for now, Scarlyn Duarte is looking for a job and looking after her baby. She says she feels lucky with a husband who is employed. Their situation is not desperate. Still, like many women, she's ready and anxious to get back to work. Maritrini Mena, CGTN, Caracas.
In other news, the leader of Italy's right-wing League party, Matteo Salvini, is standing trial on charges of kidnapping. It's over his decision to prevent a boat with more than 100 migrants from docking in 2019 when he was Interior Minister. The migrants were stranded at sea for almost 3 weeks until prosecutors intervened. Salvini faces up to 15 years in prison if found guilty. The Hungarian capital has seen rival political demonstrations. Supporters of Prime Minister Viktor Orban marched across Budapest to mark the 65th anniversary of the country's failed uprising against Soviet rule. Meanwhile, supporters of the joint opposition also held a separate demonstration. Conservative Peter Marchese has been selected to face off against Orban in the parliamentary vote. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has vowed to speed up aid to the island of La Palma as lava continues to flow more than a month after a volcanic eruption. Some $240 million in aid has been promised to help rebuild infrastructure and boost employment. More than 2,000 buildings have been destroyed and many banana plantations, which account for half of the island's revenue. Still ahead here on CGTN, could electric vehicles end up helping to power homes? We'll tell you about the country that's putting it to the test.
Climate change is happening right now. World leaders prepare for vital talks that will change the course of humanity. Action could save millions of lives. Failure could cost many more. Do they have the will to act quickly? Does the planet have the time to wait? Follow full coverage from the COP26 climate talks here on CGTN.
This week on Razor, building highways for bees and the latest mission to Venus.
I see this as my sort of payback and my personal legacy, if you like, that I'm giving something back to the community, but also I think I'm helping to sustain it into the future.
Hi there, welcome back. back, a reminder of our top story. Another possible lockdown over Christmas, so warns a top UK advisor, unless tougher measures are brought back to stem the coronavirus. 2 foreign tourists have been shot dead in Mexico. They were caught in crossfire between members of drug-related criminal groups. The 2 women from Germany and India were dining at outdoor tables at a restaurant in the beach resort of Tulum. 3 other tourists were injured. State authorities say more than 860 drug-related crimes were reported to them this year. On the other side of Mexico, there are more than 35,000 murders a year. Most of these violent crimes go unsolved, as Alistair Baverstock reports.
Carlos Martinez from the Mexican city of Tijuana says he witnesses murder almost on a daily basis. A resident of the Zona Norte, one of this border city's most violent neighborhoods, he's no longer shocked by the terror his community lives through.
There's a lot of crime, murders, shootings, kidnappings, extortion. All the worst things you can imagine happen here. There's a big demand for drugs, and the cartels fight over the territory where they sell. There are more deaths today than during the Mexican Revolution. It's just part of normal life for us.
Now 33 years old, Carlos can't remember his neighborhood being any other way. This neighborhood, Tijuana's Zona Norte, is among the most dangerous places in all of North America. Its lethal mixture of desperate migrants, prostitution, deportees, drug addiction and organized crime playing out in violent terms along the US border in a region where 96% of crimes go unsolved. That impunity, says Carlos, has a lot to do with no one wanting to stand up to the cartels.
When we see violent crime, we just ignore it. We don't want problems. If the gangsters found out you reported a crime, they'll punish you. They'll burn your hands, cut out your tongue, or decapitate you. Why would you want that?
But while impunity here is bad, it's even worse elsewhere in Mexico. Indeed, many displaced migrants arrive here from Guerrero state in the south, identified by criminal justice advocates as the worst for impunity, where they say data show more than 99% of crimes go unsolved. Mexico's country-wide rate for solving crimes, according to the NGO Zero Impunity, just 1.3%. Juan Manuel Hernandez, the president of the Baja California Security Council, says politicians at all levels are failing and need to step up.
The first thing we need is for our political leaders to recognize the problem in the first place, and there has been no political will to do that. The federal government has not done its job, but ultimately this problem is solved from the bottom, at the municipal level, where these problems begin.
With violent crime a fact of daily life in parts of Mexico, the desire by some here to cross to the other side of this border by any means necessary only grows. Alistair Baverstock, CGTN, Tijuana, Mexico.
Millions of Afghans are struggling with a lack of food, and the situation is set to get worse over winter. Droughts, the pandemic and the withdrawal of international aid following the Taliban's takeover have intensified the country's food crisis. Abdul Hadi Dariz reports from Kabul.
Despite being an agricultural country, Afghanistan has never been able to produce enough food for its people. Lack of enough rainfall has worsened food insecurity this year, and Afghanistan now heavily relies on imports. But drought is also affecting neighboring countries, so Afghanistan has to pay more for basic commodities.
Wheat and rice are imported from neighbouring countries such as Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan and Pakistan. Afghanistan is not yet self-sufficient.
Farmers say this year's drought is harsher than previous years, and the wells that they use to irrigate farmlands have all dried up.
5 years ago, the situation was good because water flowed down the mountains. Now, springs and wells have dried up.
This year's drought has driven up the prices of basic commodities. The pandemic has made things even worse. preventing people from earning a living and disrupting the free flow of goods into the country.
Borders have been closed, so imports and exports are not allowed. It's difficult for people to secure basic needs because most people working in the government receive no salary. The Afghan currency has also lost its value.
The Taliban say foreign forces are also contributing to the current food crisis.
The other reasons for the food crisis are the blockage of international aid and the freezing of Afghanistan's assets by other countries.
Forces of nature like drought are beyond any government's control, but access to aid and funds can allow the government here to import more foods, stabilize commodity prices, and provide the basic needs of the people. Abdul Hadi Dari, CGTN, Kabul.
Okay, let's take a brief look at some other news from around the world. And a banned Islamist party in Pakistan says 5 of its members have died during clashes with police in Lahore. 2 police officers were also killed. Thousands of TLP members gathered for a second day of protests demanding the release of their leader. Pakistan's government labelled the group a terrorist organisation after days of deadly rallies back in April. The American actor Alec Baldwin was handed a loaded weapon and told it was safe just moments before he discharged the weapon that killed the cinematographer Helena Hutchins. That's according to court documents. Director Joel Souza was also injured in the incident on the set of the Western film Rust on Thursday. Baldwin has said that he's fully cooperating with police. No one has yet been charged. The US Supreme Court is allowing a Texas law that bans most abortions to remain in place, but has agreed to hear arguments in the case early next month. The legislation gives any person the right to sue doctors who perform an abortion past 6 weeks before most women know that they're pregnant. And Saudi Arabia says it will aim to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2060. The announcement comes ahead of next Sunday's COP26 climate conference. The kingdom is one of the world's biggest polluters. Energy networks are increasingly relying on renewable power sources, and more of us are buying electric cars. But there are concerns that the variable nature of wind and solar power means that there may not always be enough supply to meet the huge increase in demand. So one Austrian research project has decided to look at ways for vehicles to give a little back when they're not being driven. Johannes Pleschberger reports.
Here in this sleepy Austrian village, Matthias Zawichowski is about to test a new use for his electric vehicles. He runs a local car-sharing service, and in a few months his EV batteries will not only be charged directly by solar panels, they'll also return electricity to this residential building when needed.
We get electricity for the car from the sunlight, and the electric car can also supply electricity for the building.
It's a scenario that could soon be essential for the national power grid. EV use is expected to increase electricity demand in Austria by up to 30% in the next 10 years. On top of that, people often charge their cars at similar times, creating load peaks, for example when people get home from work.
Due to this volatility, you have to look for flexible solutions. So flexibility is needed for the electricity grid.
The car battery as a two-way storage unit could be a great advantage for the power grid, but Austrian scientists are also investigating possible disadvantages.
And the problem could be in such a vehicle-to-grid approach, like in our project, that the car is empty at the end of the charging procedure. So the goal is that everything is fine with charging, driving home, and providing flexibility to the whole electricity grid.
The aim of the $6 million research project is to always keep a certain amount in the battery, so it is never empty when the car is needed. Another objective of the researchers is to reduce the costs of conventional bidirectional charging systems that include solar panels. Currently, alternative current AC must be converted to direct current DC.
The inverter converted to AC, and afterwards the charging station convert AC to DC. And now we want to minimize these losses for these two processes to have the direct use of PV for electric vehicles.
In other words, the new system uses one device instead of two, which it's hoped will convince consumers of its benefits. At the moment, however, only a few electric vehicle models can also provide output from their battery power.
The question remains whether car owners are actually willing to relinquish control over the charging of their battery, at least in part. Johannes Bleschberger, CGTN, Eisenstadt, Austria.
Well, it's apple season in the northern United States, but some orchards are having to charge more by the bushel. Climate change and labour shortages mean that farmers must find ways to adapt to survive. Sarah Walton reports from New York.
Just a few kilometres outside of the Big Apple, New Yorkers can pick their own fruit. But climate change has taken the shine off this year's harvest. A frost in late spring led to smaller crops in some parts of the country like Wisconsin and Michigan. Farmers in New York State say quantity here is good, but huge amounts of rainfall mean apples could be less sweet. At this farm, their biggest problem is now the unpredictability of the weather.
What we see in the last couple of years are more heavier storms. For instance, our farm was hit with a hailstorm on July 6th this year at 5:50 p.m. Somebody said, oh, well, it was only 4 minutes. Well, if you have a hailstorm in an orchard, 30 seconds is too much. So our apples were damaged. We're seeing more events like that.
Here they're adapting by growing smaller trees. But climate change across the country has forced other farmers to take more drastic action.
Some farms have chosen not to let the public pick their own apples this year, while others are increasing prices. And cider makers are looking at ways of protecting their crops against climate instability.
Commercial apple growers are also being pressed by a labour shortage triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic.
We really require on a workable guest worker program in the United States for agricultural labor. And when the pandemic hit, a number of countries closed their borders. If you do not have the availability of a workforce, then the supply will be impacted. Consumers will see that in the price of food.
The shortage of workers is easing as coronavirus restrictions are being lifted in the US. But industry leaders say the guest worker program is in need of reform. Meanwhile, farmers say the long-term impact of climate change is the big unknown, but they'll keep looking for ways to adapt. Sarah Walton, CGTN, New York.
In a moment, my colleague Stephen Cole will be here with the agenda. In this week's show, as countries around the world race to lower their carbon footprints, he'll be discussing the potential of hydrogen and whether it can lead the way for our green fuels of the future. And that's the agenda with Stephen Cole right after the World Today at 16:30 GMT here on CGTN. Our main headline again, the British government is facing pressures to bring back restrictions to curb a rise in COVID cases. A top advisor has warned of another possible lockdown over Christmas unless tougher measures are brought back to stem infections. That is the World Today. Thanks for watching. We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. Also YouTube and Daily Motion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, 24 hours a day on Freeview. There's more news at the top of the hour. For now, from all the team in London, goodbye.